Well, here we are a day later, and as the NFL made their announcement on the anthem policy, and obviously there was some backlash from it, but a lot of the players, they didn't get the chance to really react to it until a little bit later on in the night. And, of course, you got plenty of reaction, and, none of it seems to say, hey, you guys did a great job with this decision that you made. And obviously, John, we've got current Eagles players that have had some reaction, including the owner of the Philadelphia Eagles. So certainly want to get your take on what Jeffrey Lurie had to add. And then, of course, players like Malcolm Jenkins and Chris Long also interjected to the new anthem policy.
Yeah, well, it's no surprise. Obviously, Malcolm and Chris were not happy with it, as a number of players around the league were not happy, and nobody's happy. It's just astonishing how the NFL mucks up these types of things, and they really, really stuck their foot in it this time. As far as Jeffrey Lurie, he didn't really address the policy in the statement at all. He kind of tried to tap dance around it by talking about his support. And make no mistake, Jeffrey is politically very liberal, and he does support a number of his players who partake in social activism. Obviously, I think Malcolm Jenkins, from that perspective, should be the face of that in professional sports as a whole. That's how much he's done as far as people who are working for reform in criminal justice and police brutality and things like that. Nobody has worked more tirelessly than Malcolm, and Jeffrey has supported him every step of the way. But he didn't address the national anthem policy, and that's because it's an embarrassment for the league. They just made things worse. The story, as I kind of alluded to yesterday, not only here but on a number of stations across the country and nationally, it had gone away. It was gone. It was done. Nobody was talking about it. Nobody was interested in it. And this stupid league just threw, lighter fluid on it and ignited the whole thing again, to now to the point where it's exponentially worse.
Exponentially worse sounds just about right, because you've got, as you said, a lot of people, when it first happened back in, September, when this was happening frequently, could this all be avoided if the league and the television stations just came together and said, look, let's just not televise the anthem?
Yeah, I advocated that early in the process. I advocated that yesterday. It's a simple fix. It works from both ends. Early when it started, that wasn't tenable because the networks did see it as a legitimate news story. They wanted to cover it. It was important to cover. But as it wore on, they became less interested, and then the business of paying $7 billion to the NFL comes into it, and they don't want declining ratings. And I'm not saying that's the reason ratings decline, because there's many reasons. But from that perspective, from their perspective, it was part of it. How big of a part, who knows? And they would have been on board with not televising it and just not drawing attention to it. And it would have been a simple fix that could have been done behind closed doors, and nobody would have thought about it all that much. I'm sure there's certain people that would have said, hey, they're not televising the anthem anymore, but it wouldn't have been a groundswell. It's amazing. I was just talking to Josh before I came on. So many successful people obviously make up that league, billionaires, owners, and for all of them to make this type of decision and not realize what was coming, it's just astonishing to me.
John, with the national anthem and the military presence, I think that was something, maybe, did I hear you guys bring that up yesterday about the fact that you can't have it both ways, right? If you're going to take the military presence and try to say we support our troops and have, the giant flag that gets unveiled, and maybe, I guess, accept some money from the military. There was those controversies that went by, that teams were charging the military, different branches of the service, to come and be a part of that. You sort of have that dichotomy there, right, where the military, they want them to be involved, but then if you don't televise the anthem, then how do you get them involved?
Well, that was another black eye for the league, and even more so for the Department of Defense, and the fact that they were sort of paying for patriotism, so to speak. That scandal. But I think if you see it, it certainly generated some publicity, but it wasn't overwhelming. And the NFL did have to sort of back off that and not accept money from the DOD, and vice versa. It's probably not a good idea for them to be paying for publicity, but nonetheless, I think it boils down to, look, I'm a grown man. I have enough problems in my life. I don't care what somebody else does during the national anthem. People need to worry about themselves first and foremost. And then when you take care of that, just live and let live. If somebody is overtly disrespectful, that's a different conversation. Nobody has been overtly disrespectful. And because somebody else looks at something differently than you does not necessarily make you or them wrong.
John McMullen is with us here at JF McMullen on Twitter, and GetMoreSports.com for the national coverage. The Eagles stuff at 97.3 ESPN.com. The NFL, according to sources, did not hold formal vote before passing this anthem policy. And you're already seeing cracks, John, that some owners, the Jets, are coming out and saying, if our players are getting fined, we're paying the fines for them. So it doesn't sound like this was really unanimous.
Yeah, almost sounds like a league that would craft a rule and announce it before actually writing the rule, which they also did. They're a mess. And it starts with the leadership. Now, everybody wants to pile on Roger Goodell. I've written about this in the past. Understand what Roger Goodell is. I think people assume he's this all-powerful, omnipotent guy who runs the NFL. He's an employee of the 32 owners. He's the highest paid lightning rod in the history of mankind. That's what he's paid to do. He's paid to take the hits the owners don't want to take the hit, that the owners don't want to take. They don't want the bad publicity. They enjoy when Roger is the punching bag, and that's his job description. But if you want to blame someone, blame these 32 morons. And I include, unfortunately, Jeffrey Lurie and Jed York and Paul Allen and everybody else who would believe in progressive politics. They're in it as well. This is a terrible decision, and more than terrible, it's unnecessary.
Well, if it's the case, if you're saying that Jeffrey Lurie and Jed York, and essentially you're saying that they are more liberal, progressive thinking owners, and obviously you said many times that the whole Kaepernick thing, you can't have a blackball situation because you have owners that can't see eye to eye, so they're not going to all come together and say, "Hey, let's all not sign this guy." Right? We've established that in the past.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, from a legal sense, collusion, which is completely different, it only has to be between two people. So it could be between Roger Goodell and one team. It doesn't have to be.
Well, my question then, John, is if that's the case, if these owners can't see eye to eye on some of this thing, how did and who force this to be a quote-unquote unanimous decision?
Well, it wasn't unanimous. Jed York abstained, and now it seems like Oakland also abstained. I believe they were the second team. And it really didn't. It was sort of like Roger Goodell going through the room and saying, "Hey, what do you think?" It wasn't an actual official vote. But people need to understand this is, from their perspective, it's strictly a business decision. That's all it is. And people have talked about it. The NBA has had a similar rule, and for some reason doesn't get much criticism. People said it's because Adam Silver does a better job backing his players and social activism. But the reality is they're forced to stand, and they've been forced to stand for over 25 years. So, to me, there's a selective outrage because the NFL didn't have the foresight to craft a sort of semantically unassailable rule, as I described it. So they made a mistake from ground one. They didn't address it quickly enough. And now you have a situation where people are assuming they're trying to shut the players up. Now, you got to be realistic. You got to be honest from both sides. I mentioned Malcolm and Jeffrey Lurie, and they're doing real work. And Malcolm got $90 million from this league to use for different social activism causes. That's a voice, whether you want to admit it or not. That's a significant voice. From the owner's perspective, this is their business. This is their brand. And this is, I think people need a civics lesson. If Malcolm wants to go to a Sixers game and raise his fist or kneel during the national anthem and the Eagles try to penalize him, I will fight to the end of the world to say he has the right to do that and the Eagles shouldn't address it in any way. However, if Philadelphia doesn't want him doing it while he's in their uniform as a representative of that organization, they have that right. They do. That is not a free speech question. It is not. There are many things. You guys are in the studio right now. There are many things you have to follow from Town Square Media. There are things you can't do in your job. They're not infringing upon your free speech rights. So both sides are wrong on certain issues, and both sides are dug in.
John McMullen with us on a very passionate issue, of course. Now, John, you mentioned the NBA there, and I'm sure you probably saw Steve Kerr's comments where he says that it's typical of the way football does business and really didn't mince any words in how the NFL has handled things. So what can the NFL learn then from maybe the way the NBA did things? Because it did seem like player involvement was maybe the difference.
Yeah, I don't know. I saw Steve's comments. I don't even know if Steve knows the NBA has a rule because it's never been a big issue. Look, I don't think life is fair at times. I really don't. I often compare sort of like baseball and the PED issue. They really get hammered on that. And sort of the NFL gets a pass. I mean, guys get suspended, but they forget about it. Nobody cares. They're not forever stricken with sort of a scarlet letter that says you can't be in the Hall of Fame. That's sort of baseball's cross to bear. On the other hand, you have a situation where the NBA, as I said, has had this rule in place for over a quarter of a century. There's no questions about it.
And they consulted with the players when they were formulating that policy. I mean, that was kind of what I'm asking you is, had the NFL maybe come to the players first and said, this is kind of what we're going to try to do, if they had kept them in the loop, so to speak, instead of just unilaterally coming out and saying, this is the new rule, do you think that there would be less discontent?
Well, I think that's a false narrative. I do not believe that is the case. I've seen it reported. I know what you're saying. Remember, when this happened and Adam Silver, by the way, can't even tell you when the rule was put into place. That's how long it's been into place. He came into the league in 92, I think. So it's been in place far before that. Nobody even thought about this issue. It was not a contention in CBA. It was not an issue. No, nobody was addressing it. That part of that story is completely false. And in fact, in 2017, when Colin started getting in all the issues, the NBA sent out a memo to readdressing it, saying, look, you have to stand. This is our position. So I think there's been a lot of misinformation. Second part of that is 99%, and I hesitate because there might be one thing that I can't think of. 90% of on-field rules, game operation rules in the NFL are not part of the collective bargaining agreement. They never have been. They never will be. You see constant rule changes. So that part of it is a completely false narrative.
John McMullen's with us, by the way, at JF McMullen. So many, part of the whole issue here is it seems that there's a split and a divide, even within the NFL's, the commissioner and the ownership, as to the real reason why these guys are demonstrating. And that seems to be the root of the problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to look at things individually. I really do. I get to cover Malcolm on a daily basis. I have tremendous respect for him. I don't think there's any. He's just trying to do good for people. There's no underlying narrative. There's no sort of anything negative about what he does. In fact, he goes out of his way to not sort of downgrade others with different opinions. Always sort of tries to stay above the fray. I think there has been a shift. Colin Kaepernick has been the face. If you look at his original quote, anybody can go see it. You can go to NFL.com, search. I'll even post it on Twitter if you'd like. It talked about this country. It did not talk about police brutality originally, and it sort of shifted. And then you had the issue where he was on the practice field on the football field with the socks showing police as pigs. So there was a lot of controversy stemming from the early process of what he was trying to do. So I think you have to look at different players individually. As I said, from Malcolm's perspective, guy has never done anything disrespectful on any occasion that I've ever seen.
Well, we know it's a very polarizing topic that has been brought back to the forefront by the league itself, which it seemed like it had quieted down. But you know what? The fact that it did quiet down doesn't mean it was going to go away, right? I mean, because a new season brings new ideas and thoughts, and who knows what would have happened at the start of next season. The NFL could have done a much better job, though, of silencing this and basically, not making it as polarizing of an issue. That's where the problem, because it was going to come back, don't you think?
No, I thought the bigger story at this stage before this move was the collusion grievances from Colin and Eric Reed. I thought they were the story. If you look at Jenkins, for instance, he stopped doing his protest. Chris Long, obviously, Rodney McLeod next to him. When they got the $90 million from the league for the Players Coalition to help with some of the social causes they're passionate about. So I do think this part of it was going away. I think the bigger story would have been the collusion grievances and how they are going to work themselves out. And as I said, now you have they threw lighter fluid on it, and I have no idea why. It was completely unnecessary. You would have had a small group protesting, but again, the coverage wasn't there from the television perspective because they're concerned. I don't think it would have been a big issue. Now it's a massive issue.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, and it did seem that, I guess, after a certain point of last season that the coverage and the conversation did seemingly die down.
Yeah, by the end of last season, it virtually ceased. Nobody was talking about it. There were a few players, I forget the number, it was under 10, that were still doing it. But it wasn't. Now, I'm not saying it's not important to those individual players. I'm just talking from a national perspective. It was no longer a big story. Now, forget about us on Sports Talk Radio. Forget about ESPN. This is headline news on CNN and Fox and MSNBC. It's a self-inflicted wound, and it was an unnecessary self-inflicted wound.
We'll also have to see how much the league could fine the teams and the players and all that kind of stuff, because you say the Jets say they're going to cover the fines and all that kind of stuff. There has been no definitive number for that yet.
You know what's interesting about that? Because it's the owners agreeing to fine themselves, because the teams are getting fined, and then they sort of handed it off and saying, well, then in-house you have an opportunity if you want to pass those fines along to the prospective players, and that's where the Jets came in and said, we'll pay the fine. So essentially, in that case, owners are fining owners, which makes it even more silly and stupid.
John McMullen at JF McMullen. For more, follow him on Twitter, getmoresports.com, and the Eagles coverage at 97.3ESPN.com. He appeared via the Boardwalk on the hotline. Thanks, John.
Thank you, guys.